home and shop. He wondered what was happening to him. He knew it wasn't the time to fall apart. Still, he couldn't help but fall into a daze, because if things had turned out differently, he could have lost his family. A flashback followed, showing the meeting with Kendaka and the others. As they were about to leave, Sakamoto told them to wait because he would join them. He said they needed to calm everyone down. They were surprised by his decision. Kendaka asked if he was sure he was ready for this. He answered yes, saying he wanted to protect their town. So, they quickly moved out. At that time, chaos was beginning to spread throughout the shopping district. A man was pointing a gun at someone, declaring that those guns were rightfully theirs. Because of that, he said they didn't have to explain what they were going to do with them. He warned everyone not to interfere or they'd face the same consequences. Shin quickly grabbed the man's arm to stop him, and the man couldn't do anything. Meanwhile, Boiled had someone else in a chokehold from behind, while Heisuke was trying to calm everyone down. The men started complaining, saying it was obvious that their goal was to take the guns. One of them even claimed they had the right to use the 3 bullets they had. Then, all of them pointed their guns at Sakamoto, saying they intended to bring him down. Shin grew worried upon seeing that. Sakamoto just stood there, while Boiled warned him to watch out. But all Sakamoto could think about was the explosion at their store. The memory made him sweat, and as a result, he couldn't move a muscle, even with all those guns aimed at him. Shin quickly acted and ran behind Sakamoto. He used his ability and told the civilians to shoot him instead. The men followed his movement even though they didn't intend to, wondering why their bodies moved on their own. Shin took the bullets fired at him. Sakamoto was immediately worried for him. Luckily, Shin grabbed a manhole cover and used it as a shield. Boiled slammed the 2 men he was holding into the ground and told them to stop with the nonsense. Kendaka then asked Shin if he was okay. Shin answered that he was fine. In his mind, he knew it wasn't an illusion. He had rewritten the thoughts of a large group of people all at once. And because of that, he came to realize something. Meanwhile, Heisuke ran toward Sakamoto and asked if he was feeling sick. He still couldn't move and just apologized. He couldn't bring himself to fight. His hands were trembling and his body was frozen. His mind was in complete disarray. Kendaka grew concerned, realizing the situation had affected Sakamoto even more deeply than he expected. Sakamoto added that it was utterly devastating to think he almost lost his wife. He knew he had to bring back the assassin spirit inside him. Suddenly, someone spoke up, saying he was wrong. It was Shin. He said that Sakamoto didn't lose anything. On the contrary, he had found something truly valuable in this world. In his view, the fear of losing loved ones wasn't a weakness. True strength lies behind that fear. Sakamoto didn't expect those words and began to reflect. Shin added that he shouldn't hang his head or feel ashamed. He said he actually liked the idea of opening Sakamoto stores all over the country. Sakamoto didn't say anything in response. For now, Shin told him to leave the protecting to him until Sakamoto regains his strength. The scene shifted to the research center, Okatabe branch, lab number 2. Shin had gone there, visibly irritated, saying they were running out of time. The person he was speaking to asked if he was really sure he wanted to go through with this. It turned out to be Asakura, who called him an ignorant brat. He told him to stop babbling and called him a fool. He couldn't believe Shin was only showing up now just to say something that ridiculous. He couldn't accept that Shin wanted to push his ability to its breaking point. He confirmed if he was really serious about that. Shin smiled and said yes. He knew he was the only one who could do it. Asakura explained that, in truth, his ability to modify thoughts relied on finely tuned electrical signals that targeted specific regions of the brain to produce distinct neural activity patterns. Theoretically, they could create a device capable of reading his brain's electrical activity and amplifying it through a stronger signal, like a radio wave, to expand the range. But Shin got annoyed with the technical explanation and told him to just get on with it. Asakura felt disrespected by his commanding tone. In the lab, Shin asked how long it would take if he rushed it. He replied that it would take around 2 or 3 days, give or take. Shin was frustrated that it would take that long. Asakura reminded him that he was a scientist, not an engineer. In his mind, while he wasn't outright rejecting Shin's request, he definitely wasn't fully on board with it either. Suddenly, someone arrived and offered assistance. Both of them turned to look and were shocked to see it was Kashima. Shin said he thought Kashima was dead. But Kashima replied that he had been searching for Shin too. Asakura was irritated upon seeing him, saying he never thought he'd have to lay eyes on his disgusting face again. He asked how Kashima even had the nerve to show up there after everything he'd done. Shin explained that Kashima was no longer a threat. Kashima's arm was now a mechanical claw. Kashima admitted that, back then, he was convinced his sense of justice was correct. He now knew he had been wrong, and he apologized to them. The two were caught off guard by that. Kashima added that he genuinely wanted to put an end to all the violence happening now, so he pleaded with them to let him help. Asakura was curious as to what had changed his mind, and so Kashima explained that X had been consumed by blind violence, and now he only wanted to satisfy his thirst for revenge. As a result, many innocent people were suffering. X's actions now were far from the concept of justice Kashima once believed in. Asakura had no choice but to allow him to help. So he showed them his plan. He presented the blueprint for the device and told them they only had 1 hour to complete it. Kashima agreed without hesitation. Back in the city, chaos had broken out among the people. The men there were rallying to take down the bastards, Sakamoto and his group. They began searching for them, demanding that they show themselves. Meanwhile, Kandaka, Boiled, and Heisuke were running through the area. When asked where Shin was, Kandaka said he had no clue, but he mentioned that Shin had a plan. Shin was seen standing somewhere, holding a megaphone and wearing headphones. He was actually on top of a signal tower, along with Kashima and Asakura. They reminded him to be careful. Asakura warned him that his brain would be going through a tough test, so he shouldn't push himself too hard if he started feeling exhausted. Shin agreed, and simply said to push it to maximum power. Asakura was irritated and called him a little brat. Facing the city, Shin waited for Asakura's signal. Once he gave the go-ahead, Shin focused, and then called out to everyone carrying a weapon. He looked up and when Shin gave the command to aim their guns at the ground and fire all their bullets, the message was amplified through the tower satellites. The radio waves transmitted the signal, reaching a large number of people. As a result, they all readied their guns and fired at the ground. Everyone affected by the signal followed the command. They were all confused, wondering what had just happened. One of them said it felt like a voice told him to shoot the ground, and the person beside him agreed. Even those inside trains or outside on the streets followed the instruction. Asakura was thrilled that it actually worked. However, it was clear that using his ability to such an extent had a serious effect on Shin. He started to have a nosebleed. Asakura quickly approached him and asked if he was okay, growing worried by how bad his condition looked. Shin responded that he was fine. What mattered was that they accomplished their goal. When asked how many people he thought received the message, Asakura answered that he believed it reached the entire area, and that was more than enough. Suddenly, Shin stood up and jumped. There was no time to rest, he said. He invited them to move on to the next location. Asakura then recalled when Shin was just a kid, who would have thought that Brat would grow into someone so reliable. Kashima agreed, saying that Shin had become a thorn in the enemy's throat. Asakura commented on how arrogant that sounded. Meanwhile, in the building where X was, someone reported to him that there had been an abnormal spike in the rate of civilians using their weapons. X was shocked by this. The man added that it looked like someone was pushing them to shoot without any aim. X began to suspect that Sakamoto was behind this, sabotaging his plans. However, the one truly responsible was Shin. In the next scene, Shin used his ability again, this time to command everyone at the next location to fire all their bullets into the ground. The people had no choice but to follow, even if they didn't want to. They were all bewildered by what was happening, calling it incredibly strange. Shin was pleased, now that even Naruma had been cleared. Nearby, Boiled, Kandaka, and Heisuke witnessed what was going on and were shocked. They thought what he did was insane. As they ran, they wondered how he managed to pull it off. Shin explained that it seemed like people were picking up his superwave power and it was spreading. Although, he admitted that he didn't fully understand how it was happening yet. Heisuke was deep in thought when Shin mentioned the waves. He said that if they could transmit it from a tall enough tower, they might be able to cover all of Japan in one go. Shin turned to look at him, now seriously considering the idea of a very tall tower. Heisuke then suggested the sky tower. That stunned everyone. Still, Kashima said they might as well try it. Asakura thought for a moment and said they'd just need a bit of preparation, but in theory, it seemed possible. However, he also warned that they couldn't predict what kind of effect something that large would have on Shin's brain. Shin replied that they shouldn't worry about him and should just do it. Asakura angrily asked Shin to listen to him carefully, but Shin argued that maybe his power existed specifically for this very day, and it was clear he was fired up. Asakura didn't say anything back, while Boiled commented that Shin was truly hard-boiled. They made their way straight to the Sky Tower, jumping over the automated gate to get inside. Some men chased after them, yelling at them to stop. They warned that if they didn't, they'd be taken down. Heisuke was puzzled, wondering why there were people from JMI there. Kendaka said he would handle them. He told the others to go on ahead to the top. The group began ascending, and once they reached a high enough level, Heisuke swallowed nervously, saying they were already incredibly high up. Asakura replied, "Of course, they were trying to send waves across all of Japan." Shin urged them to hurry, as there was no time to waste. Suddenly, Shin heard something that made him turn and grow alarmed. A jet was heading straight in their direction. It crashed into the Sky Tower, damaging a major part of the structure. The top portion was severed and came crashing down. Fortunately, it fell toward a body of water below. One member of the group was seen dangling from the edge of the tower. Turns out, it was Shin, trying to pull himself up. He noticed that Boiled and Asakura were buried under the wreckage and called out to them. As Shin pulled himself up, X was suddenly standing right in front of him. Shin panicked when he saw him there. X remarked that Shin's actions were starting to resemble Sakamoto's style more and more. He told himself it was all or nothing now, especially since there was a river below them. Shin activated his ability on him. He successfully gave X a command to kick the steel beam, which caused both of them to fall. X didn't expect that, but he wasn't letting Shin get away. He caught him using his sword whip and yanked him back. He flung Shin straight through the tower's glass wall. Inside, X pointed a gun at him. He said that these guns represented his revenge against the world. That's why he told Shin not to get in the way of his plans. Sitting on the floor, Shin realized that from overusing his ability, his body wasn't responding anymore. X was ready to shoot and bid him farewell. So Shin thought to himself what he should do now. When X pulled the trigger, the gun didn't fire, something that shocked both him and Shin. He hadn't expected that at all. It turned out to be thanks to Natsuki. The scene shifted to where Natsuki was, busy on his computer alongside his brother Mafuyu, as well as Torumaru, Amine, and Kaji. When the issued guns were fired by the public, they were all surprised to find that they didn't work. In a nearby park, people who were about to shoot each other paused and questioned if the guns had shut down or malfunctioned. One of them even commented that the government's policies were incredibly careless. Back to Natsuki, he had successfully hacked the weapon system by tracking their electronic chips and disabling all the guns across Japan. Torumaru was impressed that he could pull it off. Truthfully, it should have been impossible unless the signal transmission center had been damaged. Torumaru jokingly said maybe the sky tree had been smashed. But Amine started thinking seriously about that possibility. They began to suspect that there were others out there fighting too, not just them. Back to Shin, he couldn't believe he had been saved. He felt incredibly lucky, like the bullet had gotten stuck mid-fire. X looked at the gun in his hand, then tossed it aside in frustration. Instead, he drew Takamura's katana and declared that nothing beats the old-fashioned way of killing. Back to Natsuki, he stated that, for now, all the guns they had distributed were nothing more than useless junk. The people were confused about what had just happened, realizing that the guns they were holding no longer worked. A child observing the scene questioned what was happening. Some others also noticed that the sound of gunfire had completely stopped. The scene then shifted to Granny Mia, who remarked that everything had gone quiet now. Around her were several men lying unconscious on the ground, all struck down by her acupuncture needles. It was revealed that Lu and Wutong were with her, collecting guns from the people. They grew curious and asked if everyone had simply run out of ammo. Word about the incident quickly spread. A news reporter announced that breaking news had just come in. None of the distributed firearms under the legalization policy were functioning anymore. Experts suspected it was a hacking operation carried out by an unidentified group. The news rapidly trended across social media. As a result, some people felt reassured, thinking the streets were now safe. A mother even thought that maybe it was finally okay for her to go outside and shop for their dinner. Back to X, he asked Shin if they were the ones responsible for what happened. Shin replied that he didn't know. In his mind, he truly had no idea what was going on and assumed the guns had just jammed. But he started to suspect that Saba might have something to do with it. In any case, returning to their current situation, X attacked again with his sword whip. When he swung it, the glass wall of the tower they were in shattered. X admitted that he now considered them a threat. He regretted not finishing them back when they were still in the Kanto branch. Shin smiled and said it sure took X long enough to realize that. Still, he became uneasy, knowing he was now contending with the big boss himself. But it was something he had to do. He recalled Nagumo's advice. When facing X, it was crucial not to show even a hint of bloodlust, or it could trigger the persona of Mr. Takamura. Once again, X took his stance and used his weapon, which made Shin uneasy. X targeted him with the sword whip, forcing Shin to desperately dodge. Even without the Mr. Takamura persona, X alone was already an overwhelming opponent. As Shin dodged, he suddenly noticed a fighter jet seat nearby. He figured it might have fallen there along with the rubble from above. X charged at him again, and with the situation turning into do or die, Shin decided to sit in the seat and pull something from underneath. As a result, the mechanism activated and the ejector seat launched out of the tower, taking Shin and X with it. X couldn't believe he had actually triggered the ejector seat. It reminded him even more of Sakamoto and his insane improvisations. The two of them were falling from above, but X didn't let up. He kept attacking midair. People on the floor below noticed them falling outside the window. X still had his weapon in hand, and Shin was directly beneath him. X readied his whip to strike again, but before he could land the blow, they crashed straight into a massive aquarium. People outside were startled. The two of them had smashed through the ceiling and landed directly in the giant fish tank inside, drawing the attention of a massive crowd. Shin couldn't believe they ended up in such a place. For a moment, he thought it might have saved him. But then he grew concerned because there were far too many civilians around for a fight to break out here. Meanwhile, X paused when he noticed the aquarium. A memory came flooding back. He recalled a conversation he had with Ryan during a trip. Ryan had asked if he'd ever been to an aquarium. X said no and asked why. Ryan shared that she wanted to go and thought it would be fun to see the giant, colorful tanks. While underwater, X looked somber as he took in the sight of the aquarium and the people inside. Quietly observing, he saw an image of Ryan in the crowd, smiling at him. From a distance, Shin watched, confused by what was happening. X had suddenly gone completely silent. But then Shin noticed something approaching X from behind, a shark. As it lunged forward, about to bite him, X snapped back to his senses. He struck, shattering the giant fish tank using Takamura's ultra-sharp katana. The water burst out and swept everyone away. Lying on the ground, Shin thought to himself that he had forgotten. Bloodlust didn't only come from people. Because of the incident, the aquarium was shut down. An announcement was made, thanking visitors for coming. At the same time, a missing child was reported. Meanwhile, the persona of Mr. Takamura had once again taken over X. He murmured quietly to himself, his weapon still embedded in the shark that had just Sea of Corpses, and Chapter 216 titled, Tunnel. Let's get started. Now that there was no one around because of the shattered aquarium, X and Shin faced each other once more. As he sat, Shin wasn't sure how long he could last against Takamura. Still, he had no choice. If he could even slow him down just a little, then maybe there was still hope. X raised his katana and charged at him. But Shin quickly retreated and took cover behind a pillar, which X effortlessly sliced through. Shin was impressed. Even when he looked into the future, he couldn't track X's movements. He couldn't believe that Nagumo and Sakamoto had managed to fight that beast without any ESP. He clutched his head, thinking that if he lost focus for even a split second, he would be dead on the spot. Just then, X attacked, swinging his katana straight for Shin's head. Luckily, Shin dodged just in time, with the blade only grazing his cheek. Panicked, Shin wondered if his ear had been sliced, and he reached up to check. Thankfully, it was still there. Knowing full well that X was really going to slaughter him, he leapt over the railing and escaped for now. He dove into the water, while X only watched from above, mumbling to himself. As Shin swam through the water, he told himself he just needed to get away for now. But he was startled when he realized he had ended up inside the seal tank. Some children nearby even wondered aloud if he was a caretaker when they saw him there. From Shin's point of view, he could see X approaching, and when he noticed him standing behind the children, Shin screamed, causing a mouthful of water to rush into his mouth. X quickly punched the seal tank, shattering it completely. Shin and the children dodged and moved to the side just in time. The force of the water carried Shin out of the tank, and he was flung across the floor. As he lay face down, X simply stared at him. One of the children who witnessed it began to cry, prompting a nearby man to comment that he had made the kid cry. X turned and gave them a menacing glare. In that brief moment, Shin managed to slip behind him, something that caught X by surprise. Shin told him that his real enemy was now behind him and called him a jerk. While still muttering under his breath, X moved swiftly and slashed at Shin with his katana. Thankfully, Shin ducked and narrowly avoided the strike. However, X ended up slicing one of his own men cleanly. The man's head and gun were both neatly severed. Shin was shocked and asked who that person was. The decapitated man, still somehow speaking, said he had only been trying to support X, whom he called Master. Several more of X's men were present, all armed with guns. They couldn't believe what had just happened to Kato. One of them said they came because they had heard their master, X, was fighting someone. Shin realized that X was reacting to their bloodlust, and so he warned them to stay back, unless they wanted to die. But X's men didn't believe him. One even said it was Shin who's gonna get it. X, still muttering, took his stance again. Meanwhile, as the severed head continued to speak on the floor, X treated it like a golf ball, swinging his katana like a golf club. He launched the head with such force that it struck another of his men standing nearby, slicing his entire body in half upon impact. The remaining men screamed in horror at what had just happened to Seijo. And Shin had been right. X no longer discriminated. He had begun slaughtering even his own allies. The crowd watching was stunned. Shin acted quickly, urging everyone to evacuate. He shouted that everyone needed to run. Shin grew increasingly worried for the civilians in the area, wondering what he should do. He wondered if he should try to hijack X's mind to stop him. But he wasn't sure if that would even work on a monster like him. He imagined what might happen. If he failed, it would be over. But even if he managed to freeze him for just a split second, there was no way he could defeat him alone. If only he had support from his allies. He thought of Asakura and the others and hoped that they were alright. He then ran toward another part of the aquarium, telling himself he couldn't afford to wimp out now. He had to think of something. As he moved, something caught his eye to the side. There was a body floating inside one of the fish tanks. And it wasn't just one, there were countless victims slaughtered by X. Their blood spread through the water, clearly visible through the tunnel aquarium. Their bodies floated alongside the fish inside. Shin couldn't stop himself from sweating out of fear, terrified for his life. Moments later, the entire tank had filled with blood, darkening the color of the water. Shin looked around, trying to locate X, too late to realize he was already above him. X stabbed his katana into the thick glass and targeted Shin again. The strike cracked the glass, and water began leaking out. The two faced each other once more. X emerged from the leaking tank water, while Shin was visibly on edge. He told himself he needed to stay calm and freeze him with his yesbi. However, if X sensed any bloodlust from him, and if his sword moved even slightly faster than Shin's yesbi, he would be dead. Then Shin got distracted when he noticed a woman and a child behind him. He heard the child crying and couldn't believe they had been left behind. Clenching his fist, Shin silently braced himself to make a critical decision. He told them that everything's okay. He knew what he had to do, delay X, at least long enough for Sakamoto to arrive. He had to create even the smallest opening and attack with everything he had. As he stood there thinking, X just stared at him. And right as Shin found the moment to say freeze, X had already swung his katana at Shin's neck, as if his head had been sliced clean off. Once again, Takamura's persona inside X murmured silently. X had already slashed Shin's neck with his katana before Shin could react. As a result, Shin was unable to fight back. His eyes widened when he suddenly felt someone gripping his clothes. It turned out to be Atari, who had suddenly appeared behind him. Strangely, his head was still intact. Shin was puzzled about why Atari was there. and she simply said she was glad she had made it in time. Shin asked her what she was doing there, and more importantly, he was still in shock over what had just happened. In front of him stood the murmuring persona of Takamura inside X. Shin instinctively grabbed his own neck, certain that he had been slashed. So he wondered, how was he still alive? Atari explained that it was due to the tunnel effect, a phenomenon where a particle can penetrate a barrier that should be stronger than its own energy. But the odds of this happening were incredibly small. In other words, the particles of Shin's body and those of the sword had somehow miraculously not collided. Shin was in disbelief by this explanation. He couldn't believe it was even possible for one object to pass through another. Atari insisted that even if the chance was tiny, if something was technically possible, then luck could make it happen. Shin then remembered that Atari had once told him she only had a tiny bit of luck left. Atari confirmed that this was exactly what had just been used. Meanwhile, X was just as bewildered by what had happened. He couldn't believe it either. Atari, sweating nervously, apologized to Shin, saying that because of this miracle, they were now left with some major bad luck. And what she meant by that was the arrival of new Order members at the Aquarium. Shin froze when he realized what Atari was talking about. There stood the leader of the Order, Oki, along with Torres, Kuminomi, Gozu, and Tanabata. Shin turned around to look at them, clear anxiety on his face. Torres asked how they had all ended up at the Aquarium, calling it a bizarre coincidence. Oki explained that he had a personal policy of using his free time to recharge his batteries, and scientifically speaking, visiting an aquarium was proven to relieve stress. That was why he often came there. Kuminomi said she had seen on social media that a seal pup named Splashy Maru had just been born, so she came to see it. Goza laughed at that, saying it was as if fate had brought them all there. As for himself, Goza said he had just happened to stop by to use the restroom. Torres, on the other hand, said he had been playing sea yarn pachinko and suddenly had a strong urge to smell the sea. When he asked Tanabata why he was there, he was silent at first. Then he said there was no particular reason. He had just planned long ago to visit that aquarium. He wondered if one really needed a special reason to go. He didn't understand why. And so he added that when he got home, he would write a song about that feeling. After everyone explained themselves, Torres asked what exactly was going on, since they had arrived to find Shin and Atari standing face to face with X. In Shin's mind, this really was major bad luck. His situation was already dire, and now they had shown up, too. He was certain there was no way out now. So he started thinking, what should he do next? Kuminomi said it no longer mattered. They had already decided they would kill them the moment they saw them. She then activated her electromagnet gloves to weaponize objects nearby. She targeted a large whale statue hanging above. Using her ability, she loosened the bolts holding it in place and magnetically pulled it toward herself. Gripping the rope attached to the whale, she swung it with all her strength, hurling it toward Shin and Atari. The two of them couldn't dodge in time and were sent flying across to the other side of the aquarium. The people there were startled when a massive whale statue suddenly appeared in front of them, smashing through a wall. Even so, Shin managed to land properly while carrying Atari. But Torres immediately charged at them, commenting on how lively Shin seemed to be today. Shin protected Atari as Torres aimed his sandblaster at both of them. The weapon was extremely powerful, but Shin quickly grabbed a dolphin show sign and used it as a shield. Still, he was hit in the face, and it was clear he was in bad shape. Atari grew worried as Shin collapsed to the ground. Then, something came to Atari's mind. Tearfully, she begged Shin to kill her, something Shin did not expect. Atari explained, with tears in her eyes, that he had been dragged into this situation because of her bad luck. If she were to die, maybe Shin would still have a chance to live. Since Shin had saved him, Atari now wanted to return the favor and save Shin. But Shin simply replied that it wasn't his problem. Besides, he had made a promise to Sakamoto to protect everyone until he returned. More than that, he told Atari that she was misunderstanding things. Atari was confused and didn't know what he meant. Struggling to stand, Shin said that in this world, you had to create your own luck in order to survive. Since Shin was now completely outnumbered, Oki remarked that the situation was hopeless for him. Even his luck had abandoned him. How could a worm like him possibly hope to survive now? Standing before them, Shin paused. Then an idea struck him. He said there was still one way for him to